请收看维新世界台湾宗教学会。
Well, before starting, I would like to thank Grandmaster Hunyan Shansi, who has invited us again to this wonderful temple. So I've already been here, and it's always a great pleasure. But also, I would like to thank you, Mr. President Tsai Wei-min, for inviting me to give this talk. And I would like to thank also Dr. Chang for arranging everything. And of course, I would like to thank Wei Xin Zhenjiao Merit Foundation, also the Department of Religious Culture and Information Management, organizing all the technical aspects of this conference, and also Aletheia University, which was my first host many years ago, the first time I came to Taiwan. So I would like to talk, because of the call for papers, not on digital humanities per se, but of what you suggested to look at, that is to say the religions and the responsibility towards sustainability. And of course, the link between religion and the concept of the Anthropocene. So this topic then, according to me, raises the question of whether religions can impact the behavior of their believers in the material world, or whether they remain at the wishful thinking level. And to try and respond to this quandary, I will present the major stages in the theoretical discourse on the links between religions and the ecological crisis that led to Pope Francis, the late Pope, of course, encyclical Laudato Si that came out in 2015. That is exactly 10 years ago, which urges citizens, not just Catholics, citizens of the world, to implement sustainability rapidly and globally. And I will evaluate the originality of the document and its strong integration in the Catholic tradition. But I will start with a very short survey of early European visions of nature. After all, I've come all the way from Europe to speak to you in Taiwan, in order to ground more clearly the debates on the possible responsibility of Christianity in climate change. And the first theoretical step that I will mention, in fact, which is the major foundation of the current discourse on ecology and religion, was Lynn White's 1967 article, which famously accused Christianity of being the prime perpetrator of the destruction of nature. My second point will be the address of Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew when he pronounced in 1997. The third major basis of the environmental discourse is the Anthropocene theory that was put out by Paul Crutzen in 2000. Now, Crutzen, while not incriminating Christianity per se, did accuse man of being responsible for the sorry state of nature. This will lead us to Laudato Si, the encyclical, which is a radical plea for urgency. This encyclical was rooted in several sources, and in particular in the Canticle of the Creatures of Saint Francis of Assisi, and also in Bartholomew's address, and in Paul Crutzen's research. The contents of the encyclical will be summarized, but I have really summarized also the paper that some of you have, which has been translated into Chinese. I will make it much shorter, otherwise we will still be here tomorrow. The idea then is to examine the possibility then of the action of religion on the way we function. So I will look at the end on the Laudato Si movement, which was spawned by the encyclical, which is a good, if you like, example of the powerful dynamogenic function of religion as defined by French sociologist Émile Durkheim in his essay on the religious problem and the duality of human nature that he published in 1913. And he stated that religions are systems of representations that pertain to the order of action. The function of beliefs is to produce acts, and behind those acts there are forces. And he said a theory of religion must study these forces. The believer feels sustained by these forces that both dominate him and support him, so that he experiences a form of vitality that he translates into action. And it is this dynamogenic influence of religion that explains its permanence. So this is, of course, my free translation from the text. So my first point, then, a very quick summary of the vision of nature in Europe before Christianization. First of all, the concept of nature is extremely complex since it has several meanings, and it has had several meanings over the centuries and differs according to the culture using the term. So I will use it in its most basic sense, that is to say the earth and what exists on it without having been created by man. And it is usually opposed to culture. Now, if today our eyes are focused on the state and health of nature, this has not always been the case. In prehistorical times, my ancestors, and I'm saying this because I know that Dr. Chang and other members here have come to my area, but my ancestors, I'm talking about some 50,000 years ago, probably lived in fear of nature. Except in rock shelters, they had no protection from the extremely severe weather and from the numerous aggressive animals. The only testimony we have of the link to nature are the famous paintings of Lascaux Caves. Here are some more. That's just to give some color to our conference. And we also have a few designs of men, but they're very rare. This is one in Lascaux. Men are usually represented as half animal, half human. Here, man is like a bird. And we have a few statues of females. We assume that they are to value fertility, but we don't know, in fact. We never really know exactly what they meant. But so that it's impossible to fathom, to understand really clearly the interaction between those people and the natural world. Now, in the centuries preceding the Christian missions, in France about the 4th and 5th centuries, some peoples, notably the Celts, seemed to have entertained pantheistic relations with natural elements, communicating with gods who were somehow similar to Greek gods, many standing as protectors or intercessors with nature. Yet, we do not have much knowledge of their actual relation to nature. Now, the first Christian missions spread from Asia, from the Near East, what we call the Near East, along the Roman roadways and cities. And pretty much like today, these urban citizens considered themselves as civilized and superior to the peasants, which means that they called paganas, peasant, those who did not practice the same religion, and that they called superstitions. So paganism then is a derogatory term, meaning not practicing Christianity in the beginning. So as Christianity gained ground, pagan rites were banned gradually. Now, centuries later, in the 18th and 19th century mostly, various authors who were very critical of the power of Christianity, in fact, mostly of the Roman Catholic Church, became very interested in ancient cultures, pre-Christian cultures. And they praised pantheism and paganism as being superior to Christianity. And they claimed that they were, pantheism and paganism, the authentic religion in which nature and man lived in complete harmony, with nature transmitting vitality to human beings through the agencies of multiple gods and forces. These currents paved the way for the contemporary environmentalist movement. Many of its actors are convinced today that in the early centuries of European life, man lived in peaceful union with nature, just like the Native Americans, for example, before the European conquest. But this is also what will bring about the further points now. My second point would be a little bit about how Christianity reoriented the relation to nature. The rupture brought by Christianity was in fact the view that nature was the result of a unique act of divine creation. The church, the Christian church, did not so much suppress the pantheistic beliefs and rituals of the pagans as it incorporated them after shifting their supposed origin and destination. When places and natural phenomena had been created, protected, blessed by a variety of spirits, gods, goddesses, now they stemmed from one single God. And they were blessed, if you were in the Catholic domain, by the Virgin Mary. What's more, today, the belief in the power of faith healers, I could say, of specific telluric locations is still extant in many parts of the continent. So the church has not erased all the beliefs of pre-Christian people. And including in France, a very rationalist, as you can imagine, country, we still have all these beliefs in the power of nature. So, importantly for our topic, for centuries, divine creation per se was not a major theological issue. Nature was a given, an explanation for our origin, and it was not questioned until scientific discoveries challenged creationism. The paramount issue was personal salvation, how to behave to obtain salvation, and how to benefit from God's care, to alleviate one's misery, physical suffering, poverty, wars, famine, etc. Nature was the arm of God to discipline his children. Climatic tragedies were punishment because we hadn't believed properly. All right? And this is, in fact, we have to wait until St. Francis of Assisi to have a different view of nature. And St. Francis of Assisi was one of the main sources of the encyclical. So now we move to Lynn-White theory. Christianity is responsible for the environmental crisis, he said. And this is Lynn-White. In 1967, in the journal Science, White, then a professor of history at UCLA, California, published a very short article entitled "The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis." And these roots for him were strictly biblical. The text is very thought-provoking, immediately convincing, but in afterthoughts, it gives rise to a lot of counter-arguments. His thesis was that biblical religions in the Western version, so basically Judaism and Christianity, authorized and even advised man to master nature for his own benefit. Because this is the content of Genesis 1:26 to 31. So here I have some designs from the fabulous Palatine Chapel in Palermo in Sicily, which 12th century mosaics representing the creation of the world. So Genesis, God creates the moon and the sun. Now God creates the water, the seas, and the fish. God created the animals. God created Adam and Eve. This is the Palatine Chapel. And so Lynn White says, God said, after he created man, he said, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and all over the earth. Be fruitful and increase in numbers. Fill the earth and subdue it. So Lynn rephrased this and explained that because of these verses, man, mainly Western man, had in fact tried to dominate nature and had produced the ecological crisis we are undergoing now. So he saw religion as a major factor in the decision-making process of man along the lines of Durkheim. And according to him, to White, the fable of creation in Genesis encouraged man to constantly expand scientific knowledge and develop technological power and exert it over nature and against nature. This caused the major damage to the earth. Furthermore, White sees the victory of Christianity over paganism as the greatest psychic revolution in the history of our culture, because it implied an incredible faith in perpetual progress, which has proved to be very dangerous. So, now, White's thesis was extremely criticized afterwards because he only saw the environment disaster as the direct result of biblical teachings, and critics have said that non-Christian countries such as India and China, for example, had also disrupted the normal course of nature well before the arrival of the Westerners. A Chinese geographer, for example, Yi Fuchuan, said that, well, this was very nice for China to say this, but in fact, even before the Westerners arrived, the Chinese had already disrupted the course of nature, and that there were many other forces, like economical forces, the fact that population grew, etc., that had men, disrupt the course of nature. So another example that I found also in Sicily, and I wanted to show you, is what the Romans did to animals, and the Romans at that time didn't know the Bible. But you see them, that's other mosaics that date back to the early centuries, also in Sicily. The Romans went to Africa and raptured all the big animals they could find, put them on ships to have them in circus and protozoo, in Rome. So you see them taking all these wild animals to have them more or less killed, the elephants, to have fun, all right? So the Bible is not the only culprit in this case. Now we move to the fourth point, which is Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew address on the sacredness of nature. So 30 years after Lynn White's article against Christianity, Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew was the first contemporary religious authority to speak of the need to protect nature. He gave a speech in 1997 in California at a symposium on the sacredness of the environment. And his from then on he was called the Green Patriarch. And he said that his church, the Orthodox Church, had a long-standing commitment to healing the environment. And he took stock of the dangerous consequences of humanity's disregard for the survival of God's creation. He then listed the numerous actions that his church had undertaken to give proper spiritual and ethical direction for a better awareness of the planet. In particular, dedicating one day to the holiness of creation. And in terms that would be literally taken up by Pope Francis, he identified the root problem of pollution, spiritual and material, to the result of man's sinning against the world and the refusal of man to recognize the sacrament of nature. But he also counters the arguments of Lynn White, and he says that God did not say you must dominate nature, but you must be the steward of nature. That is to say, you must take good care of it and not dominate it and destroy it. So, more importantly, he gave directions to correct the ecological crisis. And he said that man should envision a mystical link to nature and realize that man and the environment are bound together as men are bound to one another. And he also advised a life of, if you like, modesty and also of asceticism, because this way you can conserve natural resources. Now, the third step here is our friend Paul Crutzen, who invented the term the Anthropocene. So it is well known that it was in 2000, at a conference in Mexico this time, that somebody was talking about the Holocene, which was the name given to a period, that Paul Crutzen heard this and said, oh, no, the term is not correct anymore. The term should be Anthropocene to describe our own era, because the activity of humans have been so intense that they have perturbed the environment and led to climatic change. His short but dense landmark article called Geology of Mankind in 2002, he published it in 2002, opens on this statement. I quote, "For the past 3 centuries, the effect of humans on the global environment have escalated. The Anthropocene could be said to have started in the latter part of the 18th century, when analysis of air trapped in polar ice showed the beginning of the growing concentration of carbon dioxide and methane. The date also happens to coincide with James Watt when he designed the steam machine in 1784. So this is the second original sin of man, designing the steam machine. Now, Crutzen did not mention religion in his critique of man's mistreatment of the planet, but his thinking shaped the subsequent religious debates on the environment. More specifically, and I learned this thanks to the research for this, he inspired the most recent popes, from Pope John Paul II to Francis, on the issue, thanks to his proximity to the Holy See, the Vatican. Because of his many accomplishments as a scientist, he received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1995, he was invited to become a member of the prestigious Pontifical Academy of Science located in the Vatican. It's a nice place, as you can see. And he was elected to the Academy Council in 2001. Since one of the priorities of Pope Francis, who was Pope from 2013 to this year, since one of his priorities was to address the responsibility of man for the planet, Pope Francis regularly sought the advice of Crutzen, who is viewed as a key player in the formulation of the encyclical. So now the famous encyclical. So Laudato Si, it was dated May 2015, and it was published in June 2015 by the Vatican in 8 languages, including Chinese.
心情澎湃的